Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. Glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, get us talking, get us wondering, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made the connection. So, today our topic is unlocking the full economic and social potential of Latinos by preparing, connecting, and elevating Latino leaders and entrepreneurs. And this is through the Latino Leadership Institute. And we have as our guest Joelle Martinez, who is the president and CEO. The topic should be very familiar to you.
Just a little bit, Lori.
Lifted it right from your website. So I'm delighted that you're here today. You have been doing some wonderful keynote speaking for the Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance. I've had the privilege to listen to two of your keynotes, and they're absolutely wonderful. You're here in town to do a keynote. Tell me about that.
That's correct. I'm here with one of our big partners, US Bank, which of course has a huge presence here. And this week they have brought together their Hispanic Latino employees and leaders within the organization for their Hispanic Summit. And we've been partnering with US Bank for several years, and that partnership just continues to grow and grow.
You have an amazing background. You are considered your accomplishments include you're executive, you're a strategist, you're a speaker, you're a facilitator, you've got national recognition. And really what I've listened to when you've done your presentation is really, how do we do the strategies? Mm-hmm. We talk about it, but until we've got a strategy, it's just a nice thing to talk about. And you bring together so many different ways of thinking about it, including neuroscience.
I love me some neuroscience. Yes, that usually gets people hooked.
Yeah. So it's neuro leadership.
That's correct.
Latino identity, civic engagement, looking at demographic shifts, and of course your workplace diversity and inclusion. So tell me a little bit about how you came into doing this work. You helped start the Latino Leadership Institute.
That's correct. About 9 years ago. Well, I come from a family of just extraordinary Latino leaders, business owners. My mom, who's actually sitting here with me today, started as a bank teller actually, and then ended up being a branch president at US Bank. So this is coming full circle. My grandmother was an elected leader in Denver. And so growing up, I just thought Latinos were leaders and we were built to lead. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting as I started my career and, the further and further you climb, the more you realize just how few Latinos there are around the table. And for the few of us that were there, how alone and isolating that had become. And
also must have felt like a whole lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility. I was very fortunate because of my family. I had a lot of opportunities very early on in my career, and I worked really hard and I got myself into important positions. But again, my journey, my route there was a difficult one. It was a lonely one. And when the opportunity came to build an institute that would cultivate a new generation of leaders, the whole hope was that they wouldn't necessarily have to have those same experiences that I did early in my career.
And with that, your Leadership Institute, what inspired that to take place? Why the Institute?
Well, I had spent a majority of my career as a political strategist and communications director, and I was able to work with some of the best elected officials across the country. And in 2008, I was actually at the time a strategist for Hillary Clinton's campaign. I actually did a lot of her Latino strategy, traveled with her. And, also was part of that transition going over to Barack Obama. And I had a wonderful experience getting to do a lot of different things, including working on some strategy around Affordable Care Act and some really big policies. And quite frankly, I was probably headed to just about any job that I wanted. And then
the doors were open.
The doors were open. A lot of people asking, but I wanted to be a mom too. And that was one of those decisions. So after the '08 election cycle, I had some decisions to make, and I wanted to be a mom. And so in 2009, I was blessed with twins, and I actually put a pause on my career and did some consulting, but I stayed home for the first 3 years of my children's life, which I talk about sometimes in the keynote, these decisions that we make about career and family and, kind of this extra burden, I think sometimes an opportunity that women and mothers get to have, especially Latina mothers. And I don't regret a single moment of that. And when it was time to get back into it, you're feeling a little nervous and, what do I do? Will people even remember me? Do I have to start at the bottom again? And I was really fortunate again during the 2012 cycle to get picked up on many different projects. And right after the election, when you are a two-time president, you throw the best holiday parties out there. I mean, they are just fun because you're a lame duck from that time, and there's just a lot to celebrate.
It's kicking back time.
It's fun, and in all the years that I traveled back and forth between Denver and Washington D.C., I'd never taken my husband to Washington. And what a perfect time for us to go to Washington, D.C. and just be in all the celebrations. It was also one of the first times that we left our twins with my parents. And so, there's a lot of emotions that go along with that. And I remember the morning, crisp December morning in Washington, D.C., and you're standing out in line getting ready to get into the White House. And I'd been there. So kind of the excitement of it. I mean, it's
The
always
thrill was
exciting,
gone.
but that's a place of work.
Yeah.
And, but I got to experience it through my husband and just how fascinating that is for someone going in. But that day took a turn. The president and the first lady were a little late coming into the celebration, and there was some rumblings. And I had heard that the president was in was actually pulled away and was in one of the secret rooms. And so, of course, I think that it's an attack, and are we safe? Well, we learned to find out, throughout that day about the horrific incidents at Sandy Hook. And you all probably knew more than we did, because there is barely any cell service in the White House. You have to be in certain spaces and places. So obviously what I thought was a celebration had turned into just a tragic day. But on that day, I watched the president come out before us in tears. I watched the first lady, kind of rub his back. And actually, it was the first lady who spoke that day, that the president really was at a loss for words. And I remember we were sitting with a group of senior advisors at the White House, and everyone is talking about, what would come next after Sandy Hook. And, someone said, well, maybe we'll get gun reform. Maybe we can put something forward. And another individual around the circle said, well, no, not even after this. And I looked at my husband and I just said, I'm done. I'm done with politics. For so long, I had thought that we were going to create change and make the world better for our children. Mm-hmm. And I really believed in the work that I did after all of those years. But at that moment, I just realized that we were not headed in the direction that I had hoped for. And so we walked back to the hotel sobbing. I just wanted to talk to my young twins. So my mom put them on the phone, even though they probably, have no memory of this because they were still pretty young. But that day, I knew it was my last day in Washington, D.C. And it just so happened that a group of extraordinary Latino leaders at about the same time were beginning to think about building a new pipeline of leaders. And something just really clicked for me, Lori, that the kind of change that I had envisioned that I would be able to make in Washington, D.C. actually could be made if we just changed leadership altogether. That part of the problem is that we're relying on these leaders to make change for us, but they're not the right leaders. They definitely don't always have our best interest in mind. And so the easiest conclusion was, okay, just going to develop and cultivate a brand of new leaders that, can be in all sectors and industries and create a ripple effect of change. And, where my light had dimmed just a bit, I think I found my true north by finding the Latino Leadership Institute and doing this work for now over 9 years.
And maybe it didn't really dim. Maybe it just got deeper
Yeah, maybe.
and had a renewed sense of the importance.
Yeah, there's so many things we want to fix and change,
Mhm.
and there's so many things that need our leadership. And going back to where we started, we just were not around the table.
And it's
And
gotten
that's a problem.
less,
Oh,
actually.
it's actually has. So if we look at the demographic shift, back in the 1990s, Latinos were about 8% of the workforce, and we represented about 3% of executive leadership across all sectors and industries. Fast forward to today, we're 20% of the population and 4% of leadership. So
Math just doesn't
the
work.
gap has
Yeah.
actually grown, and it's at about 450%, the largest of any gap out there today. So the work of the Latino leadership is about making change, but it's also about closing that opportunity gap.
And I want to make sure that our listeners know that they can go to your website. It's excellent. latinoslead.org. Highly recommend it. We need to take a break. I wish that we could just keep going on and not have any breaks, but we love having the support of our sponsors and appreciate the work that they do to help keep us on the air with having great guests like Joelle. We'll be right back. We'll learn more about the work that's being done at the Latino Leadership Institute and some of the work that Joelle's doing in her various keynote presentations. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Yeah, we got relatively. We were around 11:45. Yep, that's right. Yep, no problem.
Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm Lori Fitz, your host. And today we have Joelle Martinez, and she is a nationally recognized executive, a strategist, a speaker, a facilitator, a visionary leader. She dedicates her life to helping cross-sector leaders realize their individual potential, as well as the economic and social opportunities presented by an increasingly diverse U.S. population. She brings to us insights about her Latino Leadership Institute that she helped found. You've got some great programs that you do there. I was looking through your website and I saw two main programs, the Ignite and Leap. Tell me a little bit about those.
So, a little bit of background on the Latino Leadership Institute. We really work with high potential Latinos across all sectors and industries. As I had mentioned previously, Latinos across all sectors and industries are nearly invisible in key leadership positions. And that's actually a problem for all of us to consider. If you imagine the Latino population growing from the 20% that it is today, fast forward to 2050, and about 1 in every 3 Americans will identify as Latino. And so, to address that invisibility, to address a lot of the social and economic gaps, we began to develop training programs for Latino leaders. And quite frankly, it was based on two very important factors: neuroleadership and neuroscience, and our own experience being Latinos kind of navigating our careers and our professional journeys.
I'd say it's a little unique.
It is absolutely unique. We've done a lot. It really melded the things that I knew. I mean, obviously, I understood my journey, began to talk to friends and colleagues, and realized, wow, you experienced that too. Well, I experienced that, and so it was really easy for me to go in there and begin to build content and curriculum to kind of address some of those barriers and pain points. The neuro leadership piece really came into play because from day one, I said, we're not just training Latinos to be leaders, we're training leaders for the 21st century. And I really want to make sure that they have the best possible resources and tools in their toolbox to be the most effective leaders. And if we think about life today and our reliance on things like technology and the phone, what's startling for most people is that we actually process more data in a single week than previous generations did throughout their entire careers. So we are supposed to make decisions. The world is ever changing. We have to be more productive than ever before. And quite frankly, the one muscle that we don't invest enough in is our brain and the capacity to make better decisions. You know, the role that things like meditation play and really tapping into the better decision-making processes.
Also,
So
probably looking at some of the fears,
fears are
what-
big.
what things stop us
Yes.
as well as encourage us.
Well, I think that was always the fascinating part. I mean, human beings believe that we are logical, rational individuals, and 95% of all of our brain activity is actually done on the unconscious level. And 85% of all of our decisions are made in our limbic systems, which is where emotions and memories and a lot of our hormone balance come from. And so,
And it's only after that we put all the logic to it.
no, it is a very, very small. And the
Uh-huh.
thing about it is that especially fear and
Yeah.
and you know, fear at being uncomfortable in a certain situation, fear the first day of your job, whatever the case may be, when we have fear, it actually cuts off access to the prefrontal cortex, which is where our logical and rational brains are. And so for many Latinos trying to navigate, you could say, well, just go to college and that'll fix the problem. But why weren't they moving up from management to senior management? What
Mhm.
was the gap that was happening there? And on the one hand, it was the journey, those unique barriers, those cultural differences that they were coming and finding conflict in at the workplace. And on the other hand, were memories, emotions, and this limbic system. And for most people, we form our understanding of who we are and how we relate to the world when we're in middle school. Well, for many of us Latinos, there weren't many role models. There weren't many TV shows that showed us as doctors and lawyers and presidents of the United States. And so we have to overcome a lot of that wiring in our brains that have, you know, kind of put us at a disadvantage of what our potential is. So the work of the Institute is melding those two things together. And when I say unlocking the full potential of Latinos, it's by melding those two together and adding one third layer, which is the social capital component. You know, we're not part of country clubs, which is usually where you learn about opportunities, where someone grabs you and taps you on the shoulder and you just seem to walk in. In fact, Harvard Business Review said that social capital is the number one indicator now of economic prosperity. So at the Institute, we combine the cultural experiences with the neuroscience and build a massive professional Latino network in order to overcome those three major barriers to success for Latinos.
And it may not be in country clubs in the future.
No.
It may be in a very different opportunity situations.
Oh, absolutely. I believe that is 100% true. One, because demographics are changing
Right.
and those country clubs may change.
Yeah.
But honestly, the way we operate in society is
Mhm.
changing.
Our population in terms of folks coming into the workforce.
It is changing. If you are in the workforce today, you notice a couple things. Number one, it's the first time ever that we have 5 generations working in the workforce. So we're getting the Gen Zers in, and they're working right alongside the boomers. But more interesting is that 78% of all net new employees coming into the workforce today identify as Latino. So this is happening at a time where there's so much disruption and change in the workforce. The demographic shift is what people are definitely noticing. And COVID actually sped that process up. We were already going to see about a 5 or 10-year window when boomers were going to leave. And then the net new employees, Latinos, were going to come into that position. But a lot of boomers took early retirement. So that kind of sped it up about 5 years. So a lot of diversity in the workforce today.
And Latinos have a lot of spending power.
Huge spending power. I think that's the one big narrative that as I travel the country, I really want to make sure, especially in recent history, there's been these messages that, Latinos are takers, not givers, that, we're not contributing. And, we have a Latino US GDP of about $2.8 trillion. And so you might wonder, well, how big is $2.8 trillion really? Well, the reality is that if we were an independent country, we would be the 5th largest GDP in the world. And again, our demographics are going to double in size. So today, tortillas outsell hot dog buns and hamburger buns combined. And salsa, not ketchup, is America's #1 selling condiment. And so our economic superpower is truly fueling the economy. And some of that comes from small business. Latinos are generally entrepreneurs. It's an important part of how we build wealth in our community. And after the last recession, Latinos were responsible for 86% of all new businesses opened in the United States. So it's why we started our entrepreneurship program, LEAP. So coupled with Ignite, which is the professional development program we were just speaking about, we also developed an entrepreneurship program, because as those demographic shifts, as the economy begins to shift, we've got to not just open Latino businesses, we have to grow them. And today, despite our Latino businesses, 93% of them are sole proprietorships. So they're not growing to have employees and workforces. And that's a problem we should all be concerned about, because our economy needs these businesses to thrive. And so we're really working to close some of those gaps for our entrepreneurs and find ways to actually grow and scale these businesses.
So you've got leadership, you've got entrepreneurship. Tell me about the activation and expertise. What's that about in your big circles?
Social capital is everything. It's golden. And I think that's what excites me so much, is that for so long, Latinos in their workplace could feel isolated or siloed and maybe not connected to other Latinos even outside their industry. And the way that I think about it is we are cross-pollinating these Latino leaders across sectors and industries. So we can have elected officials working alongside philanthropic leaders and nonprofit leaders. And we're beginning now to see this new web of social capital. We just did a survey within our network, and I have high expectations for the work we do. But over 96% of our network commented that through the LLI, they've actually built and expanded their professional network. 86% of them are serving as mentors to a younger mentee, Latino mentee. That is what we have long needed in order to propel us forward. And so that is incredibly important. And while it's not, maybe it's because of my background and my history, one of the other really proud moments is that we've activated Latinos who otherwise would not run for elected office, and we have them running for elected office today. Just a little micro of that impact is at my home in Denver, Colorado. Our Denver City Council has 13 elected members. 6 of them are Latina. Okay. And the other day we had our inauguration, and that image of those 6 Latinas sitting up there, and, extra special for me because they honored my grandmother, who was the first Latina president of that city council all those years ago. So as a youth, thinking that Latinos were just leaders, because that's truly the framework that I had growing up, I'm beginning to actually see that now. In all of these pockets, people are stepping into these leadership positions, elected, appointed, serving on boards and commissions, taking more senior roles in their organizations. That's the vision. That's the work. And that's what we're leading towards.
And that's the vision you had initially
Yes.
when you were going to leave politics. Doesn't sound like you completely left politics.
I don't think they ever let you leave. I still get the calls and people
Uh-huh.
still run, and it's just a different role that I have. I really focus in on the talent and the character and the ability for us to actually make key decisions and make change now because we have these resources. We have people in our corner. We have people alongside of us in this journey. It's definitely not as lonely anymore. It's definitely more powerful. And that's what I feel. I feel that poder in the work that we do.
I love that you have so many cross industry work that you're doing. When you're working with corporations, do you do much with their either employee resource group, or sometimes they're called the business resource groups? Is that part of what you do to help inspire and get activated some of those folks?
Yeah, and I have to say that the business resource groups are central in a lot of the work that companies and organizations can do. When we survey a lot of Latino professionals, it's important to know that 76% of them report repressing part of their identity while they're at work in order to get ahead. They lack a sense of belonging and really feeling like there's a place for them within the organization. So the resource groups really provide that sense of connection and belonging. We at the LLI work right alongside and complement the work that they are all doing by putting our leadership program directly into their ERGs and BRGs. They obviously bring me in for keynotes and
Mhm.
subject matter expertise, which is also important. We had a great partner who really wanted to invest in their resource group, and they called it the Hispanic Network. Well, they didn't talk to their employees before they spent a lot of money on that marketing and learned to find out after the fact that their employees did not actually identify with the term Hispanic at all. So one of the things that the Institute can do for you is really help you navigate that and,
Mhm.
and understand that we are not a monolith. We're this mosaic. And how do you strategize around a mosaic that has a lot of different layers to it?
And there are some that may feel comfortable with Hispanic, although Hispanic is a made up name that Nixon basically did for, our census. So it's not necessarily
It's
something.
all a social construct.
Yeah.
We have to remind ourselves of that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with the resource group, I'm sure you're hearing stories not only of not feeling like they can bring their whole person to work, but also understanding how to navigate the culture of the work.
Yeah.
Because it is a culture, and every business has a little bit different cultural norms and rules, and you kind of find them out by mistake sometimes more than you do having it be straightforward. How do you help navigate that, helping folks understand how they can keep their own identity, but still navigate the culture of the business?
I really go back to both context and neuroscience. And so those things really matter for me: data, context, neuroscience, and the combination of the two. So as we started, one, I really help people understand this fear base that we could have the best policies and the best goals around DE&I possible. But at the end of the day, any type of change is going to cause us fear. And usually we see that that is what prevents us from actually doing something. Well, fear's on both sides.
Mhm.
Those that are in power fear the change and loss of power. And those that are trying to get there also fear what that journey will look like and what the responsibilities may be. So overcoming fear through some of the work in neuroscience is key. I think the second one is context. I mean, you talked a little bit about Hispanic, Latino. I share oftentimes about race and ethnicity. Hispanic, Latino is an ethnicity, not a race. I remember filling out my twins' birth certificates and having to check boxes. And I was utterly confused. Here I am, an adult, educated person who's been in, these positions of power and influence
You've been
myself.
in the White House.
I've been in the White House, and I didn't really know I was white. I just thought I was Hispanic, Latino. And little do I know, when I'm actually having to fill out those forms, I think it's the first time I really paid attention that I had to mark white and then Hispanic, Latino. And, like so many Americans, I am, ninth generation Coloradoan. I have everything from Irish to indigenous blood and everything in between. But my identifier was always Hispanic, Latino. I thought that's what we were. And so, the social construct really matters, and that context matters, is how we got here, why we even talk about the things the way that we do. So blend the fear and the neuroscience, blend some of the history and context, a lot of folks that have been in a position of privilege and power don't realize that. They don't realize that some of us have to check box that we don't understand, let alone identify with, and the pain and the confusion that are associated with those boxes. The 2020
And then it also
census,
feels much like an other.
another, like,
Yeah.
what do I put? And then what are my children putting,
Mhm.
that are even more blended than I am? And they, how do they really get to identify? And so I was really excited. I think there's some progress that could be made. The 2020 census was a huge step forward. We had a 350% increase in individuals picking multiracial. It was the first time you could actually pick that as an identifier. And I would say most people are probably going to be in that category if you've lived in America for a while.
Well, by 2050, we're going to be a majority
nation.
nation.
And
We're already there in 13 states and nothing bad happened.
nothing
in
bad.
fact,
And in
lots
fact,
of
those
good things.
economies are the best
They are.
economies.
They are.
They're the standalone GDPs if we're talking about economic factors. So I think that context matters because people often try to solve problems and build solutions to problems they don't actually understand. And so taking in the neuroscience, taking in the social, and then the data.
Mhm.
I mean, everyone has to be motivated, especially in DE&I. Find your why and you're going to find your way. For some people, the why is truly the social good and making sure that we right a lot of wrongs of injustice. For others, it is the bottom line, and that's important too. And we don't move forward. Our economic vitality of this country is going to rely on us unlocking this potential. So combine the data with the history and the context, throw in some neuroscience, and that's how we help these leaders think about the future a little bit differently.
And with that, we'll go to commercial. And we'll be back with Joelle Martinez to talk more about the Leadership Institute and some things that we can think about. What we can do personally. Each one of us can have a call to action to make a difference. And I know that our audience loves to support multicultural efforts. And today, especially, we want to support the Latino leadership.
Yep, about 13 minutes and 15 seconds.
Thank you so much for being with us today on Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. We have had the joy of having Joelle Martinez join us today. She is the CEO and president of the Latino Leadership Institute. I want to make sure I get that website out for everyone. The Latinos Lead. It's latinoslead.org. A wonderful organization that's really building the future for all of us, and giving some examples and things of what we can do is in this segment. But you've also done some amazing work for waking up the potential and having people better recognize the potential of the Latino leaders. We started to talk in the last segment about the challenges of navigating the cultural workplace, because there's a culture in every workplace, and there's sort of expectations that have been built up in the cultural workforce. I worked on a e-learning years ago that was looking at in the restaurant industry. A Latina that was managing the restaurant did a beautiful job of empowering and creating a cohesive environment where people all did a superior job. I mean, they got there on time. They did beautiful execution. Her manager comes and wants to compliment her, and she's uncomfortable with being complimented. And he takes her being complimented as like, well, she must not have a pride in what she does, or maybe it is everyone else and not her. Jobs come up. He's not asking her to apply. She's feeling uncomfortable. Can she apply? And why isn't she being considered? There's a cultural disconnect going on. Tell me about what's going on there.
Yeah. And I always want to put a caveat or a preface this when we talk about cultural norms and culture scripting, is that it's a slippery slope to stereotyping.
Yes.
And so when I provide some insight into these things, I always want to put that in there, that we all have a varied experience. So generalities you've got to be a little bit careful with. But one of the things that we've spent a lot of time and research and really understanding is understanding how our environments really do condition us for certain things. And growing up Latina, I could definitely say there have been times in my own career that, I go back to things I learned. I especially spent a lot of time with my great grandparents, and always stay humble was a big one. I remember when I was trying to look for colleges, my great grandmother cried. She did not want me leaving the state, even though I did. Did not always listen directly, but this idea of me leaving was really difficult, and it was kind of outside the norm.
And your commitment to La Familia.
And the commitment to familia. You will still get messages.
Yeah.
Well, aren't you supposed to be home with your kids, or who makes dinner for your kids? And that question to me is hilarious. I'm a horrible cook, hopefully my husband, so that it's in their best interest if he's the one helping out with dinners. But those are norms, and 40% of Latinas will not take a promotion in the workplace because it is a direct conflict with her familial obligations. And especially for Latinas, we have a lot of responsibility within our households. So in those situations, one of the things that's really important for management to understand is that how we were raised and in the circumstances of which we were raised are going to change how we respond to things. Taking a compliment is not a natural. In fact, there are some Central American cultures where humility and being humble is one of the biggest of all values. So if someone is raised with that over and over again, it's not that they don't have pride. It's not that they don't have motivation to climb up in their career. It just means that humility has been really embedded in their psyche and how they respond to circumstances. So when you give someone a compliment and they're unable to take it, it could just be because they were raised to not take them. And so it's a question that I would pose on management. Is it more important that they change and they take the compliment to make you feel comfortable? Or is it more important for you to have open and honest conversations with them to understand what would actually make them feel good? And I think it comes down to empathy and conversations. We have to stop thinking that our way is the only way and that others need to change in order to make us feel comfortable. And I feel a lot of time management, they make assumptions, and they're used to managing, predominantly male, predominantly white workforces. And that is the workforce of yesterday. So in order to manage the workforce of tomorrow, you have to be open to these conversations, understanding that one's experience is going to lead to their reactions and their thinking in the workplace. It doesn't matter what the old rules of engagement might have been.
And it might take a little bit more time, but it might also make your workforce more interesting and your day more interesting and the work that you do more interesting.
I could argue that a lot of our values and norms that we have as Latinos would be good for the workplace. I think this idea of being social and kind of caring about the broader community. I think the idea that we have that, you work hard. Hard work is very much embedded in who we are. That's a good asset to have in the workplace. Loyalty. Loyalty is another one of those values. But in the workplace, where loyalty can almost be used against us, that's where we get down some of those slippery slopes. So I have a lot of optimism for the future. I know I say often we're at this critical juncture, and sometimes I feel like I take 10 steps forward to take 20 back. But I'm optimistic for the future because the talent pipeline is vast. And I believe the conversations that we're helping to open are really changing the way people think about things.
With the opportunity of reaching out to our audience, what are some things you just want them to be thinking about and challenging them to think about in terms of what can they do?
Well, number one, visit our website, Latinos Lead. I think that's a really important resource and tool. I think opening up conversations, looking at the data, the narrative that is out there right now about Latinos is really flawed and quite limited. And I think the best thing that they could do is really learn about our diverse community, how we impact every facet of life, and open up opportunities and look at themselves. Things have to change. We're not a white male workforce anymore. And so it's going to take those in power willing to change, willing to have conversations, willing to bring in folks like us to really help them think through and prepare for that workforce of tomorrow. I believe in partnership, we can make a better workforce future for all.
When you do your keynote presentations, you do it with all kinds of different companies. Tell us some of the ones that you've been working with.
Oh, I think that it's my favorite. I mean, first of all, you mentioned MFHA, which, by the way, every time I say that, I have to slow it down.
Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance.
Yes. And, what I love about partnering with them is I get to touch so many different types of organizations and everything from restaurant to hospitality. And just last week, we were on the phone with Lowe's, and my a great, great friend, KT, who's the head of diversity at Taco Bell. And I'm seeing, kind of in learning the different pain points and opportunities within that industry. But of course, I'm here in Minneapolis with US Bank. So we work a lot with the financial industry, US Bank, done a lot with Charles Schwab. Lumen is a big partner of ours, and we just started working with Marathon Petroleum as well. And so really even getting into oil and gas, there's not a sector industry that we can't help support, because at the basis of what we're doing, we're working on individuals' potential, and that translates across all sectors and industries. So it's been great. And the thing that I get asked all the time, well, aren't the problems different in the different sectors and industries? And I say, everyone has their nuances, but the basic premise of what we're trying to address remains the same.
How about with community groups?
That's where my core is, in community groups. And so we work with nonprofits, a lot of executive directors and leadership groups. We partner with a lot of nonprofits, Hispanic scholarship funds. I mean, we're looking at the pipeline. We're looking at Hispanic serving institutions, again, looking at that collegiate level and helping them navigate their careers. And so, the partnerships are some of my favorite.
And if you were to have a crystal ball and the work that you're doing and making a shift at this critical juncture, and we get through this critical juncture and we start to bloom in the ways that we should, what does that look like?
Well, we've already started building. I don't believe in crystal balls. I think destiny is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice.
Good.
It's a matter of actions that we have to take. And so, my crystal ball already has, we're going to work on building an AI generated platform to really help connect the dots and really help this grow to scale. But the idea behind that is that the individual can get supported along their journey, but companies and organizations will have access to this large talent pipeline. And that is critical, because the number one excuse I get from employers about why their leadership gap is so great is they will tell me, well, we'd love to hire them and promote them. We can't find them. Well, we're going to go solve that problem, because you will be able to find them. And so I believe it's all about connections. It is about culture, content, and connections. And that's what we're going to build. And I think that's going to be the pathway forward.
Well, of course, I'm delighted that Connections on Connections Radio Show is part of that power. Any closing comments that you want to have us be thinking about?
No, I think I've said it all. I will say this, that unlocking the social and economic potential of Latinos is not just a Latino issue. It is something we should all be involved with. We all gain from it. And it's why partnership and collaboration is so important.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for being here today. And thank you for the work that you're doing with the Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance. You'll be in Chicago at the McDonald's on November 9th. It'll be delightful to have you be at that as well. From my experience with the MFHA work that I do, you've made a huge impact on
Thank you.
The folks that are there. I am overwhelmed and delighted to see them be excited about doing something. It's not just a matter of listening and going, oh, that's interesting. You talk about Lowe's, you talk about Taco Bell. There's several others that have voiced interest in having this be awareness. I think you opened people's eyes in terms of looking at the demographics, but you made sense of the demographics as well.
Thank you.
Because we have this issue, because we have this gap, because we have this opportunity to make a difference, what can we do? So thank you for being with us today. And thank you for listening and being part of Connections Radio Show. And I encourage you to connect up with this website, and we'll give that again. That's
Latinos with an S, lead.org.
And thank you for joining us, and be with us next week on Connections Radio Show here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, on AM 950.